Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are here tonight with episode number 46. There's a six there, 46 of the Help Action series. This one is a little bit of a special episode, a little bit different. I have two guests who are joining me this evening, and tonight we're going to be discussing generational gaming, gaming with multiple generations of the same family. And I'm very excited to welcome my two guests this evening. One of them has been on the show a long time ago, and his name is Jacob, and this is his son, Zach. So, you sons of a bitches, how are you doing?
You warned us it was coming, and it was still slightly jarring. Doing good. Glad to be back.
I'm doing good too.
Excellent. Yeah, so let everybody know where you might have stuff going on, where they can find you on the internet, what you might have going on, and how is it that you are related to one another?
Well, I am Jake, also known as MTD Jake, from Mini Terrain Domain, and that's where you can find me. On Monday nights, I run the Scribes and Scrolls, the Candlekeep Mysteries D&D live stream. On Tuesday nights, I'm currently a guest DM for the Dreadful Tales anthology on fortnerd.com. On Thursday nights, of course, is our long-running Dawnbringers campaign, where I get to DM Jeremy here. And Zach has been a member of the Dawnbringers briefly. So that happens on Thursdays, and then once a month, I play in a game on Nerdarchy with Nerdarchist Ted as our DM. And I can also be found on Mini Terrain Domain occasionally, painting miniatures and doing live crafting streams. And I am the Lord of the Mini Terrain Domain Manor and father of Zachary.
And I am Zach, and I don't do any of that. But I do play D&D a lot. And I played D&D a lot with my father. He got me into it. I am son of Jake, heir to Mini Terrain Domain. But other than that, I'm on Twitter at Zach Noorman. I don't do anything. There's no reason to follow me, but I'm there if you'd like to. And I'm very, very excited to be here and talk to Jeremy Lilly.
Whenever he describes himself as the heir to Mini Terrain Domain, I can't tell if it's just with that air of pride or if he's plotting my demise.
Both.
Exactly. It's pride, so that when the demise comes through, he can plead ignorance. No.
Mm-hmm.
I love the man.
Except a wonderful empire to rule.
Well, that's a great first question, Zach. What do you think about the empire that your father has built? Pretend like he's not here.
All right, I'll cover him up in my view. Now I have to because he's making a dumb face. So I don't know. It's all super cool to me because I remember when he was getting started with it, and I remember when he was running games online on YouTube or wherever. At the desk I'm sitting at that wall of this room, which is now my bedroom, it used to be his office. And that's kind of where he got started on a lot of the streaming stuff, as far as I can remember. And it's just been really cool to see he built this kind of following and has garnered a good community of people that it's always cool to see. You know, I make sure to follow them all and just stalk because I don't engage a whole lot, but I see everything and I see where everyone's going. And it's super cool to be like, hey, my dad knows them. Hey, you know, and it's super cool to see just how much the channel has grown and how, I mean, not to toot his horn, but I think the production's really good all the time. And it's just really nice. And I love when I can tell my friends Yeah, my dad's famous on Twitch. No deal. Yeah, I'm wearing his merch on my. I'm wearing a merch T-shirt. Yeah, no, it's fun, and I'm proud of him for it. It's super cool.
Yeah, I feel much the same way. I mean, he's not my dad, but but no, I've watched him grow from a very small channel, much the same as mine was, to definitely a community that has a very wide reach, and has a lot of wonderful influence with people, and it's really awesome to see that he's managed to do all of that. But there is a reason that people should follow you on Twitter, Zach, and that's because you're a badass in your own right.
I don't know about that, but
Well, I mean, we're slapping backs here. Watch out, Lloyd. No. So one of the first questions that I really like asking people, I know that Jake and I have talked about this before, but I think it's going to take on some new meaning perhaps through this lens. When and how did you get into gaming? How did you find this weird, quirky little hobby of ours?
Are you asking me or
both of you? Either one of you. I would like to hear from both of you.
Well,
just not at the same time necessarily.
Go ahead, Zach.
All right. Well, getting into D&D was through my dad, pretty much, like, fully. I remember hearing about D&D and hearing about the stuff he got up to when he played back in the 90s or whatever, some long forgotten age. And I remember hearing epic tales of his characters, and he would ascribe this kind of legendary status to both the stuff that they did and the game itself. And so I always, with a lot of things he tells me about that I don't know about, they kind of enter into my brain as like this like legendary thing that exists. And for D&D, it was always this really cool thing. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how to get into it or anything. And then however many years ago when he got back into it, he kind of dragged me into it. He was like, hey, you want to try out this D&D Next playtest? You want to try out this, you want to join this campaign of D&D with some people I know? And that was kind of how I got started playing it. And we got up to some shenanigans, and it was all very fun. So for me, D&D, I've kind of gotten into it as this opportunity to be goofy and have a lot of fun. It has been a lot of fun. But that's how I got into it. I got into it through my dad.
Were you a fan of like the fantasy genre or things like that through media even before you started playing?
Oh, yes.
Also because of your dad, or
also because of my dad?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the things that I love and hold dear, I remember my dad making sure to show me, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy of films, or like Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite game series. I remember when he got us a Wii, and he got 2 games. He got Super Mario Paper, which was the game that I could play, and then he got Zelda Twilight Princess, and he said, don't play this until I beat it, because he knew that me or my sister would mess up his save data somehow. But he brought that into the house, and it became one of my favorite games. And so fantasy has always been awesome and super cool, and I love all sorts of fantasy things, and it is probably my favorite kind of genre in that category, I guess.
What is a fandom of yours that your father doesn't share?
Ooh, good question. Yeah. Good question. I am ashamed to say that I play a lot of Genshin Impact, which is some MMO game or whatever. That's kind of where the Venn diagram parts is. Games like that. I struggle to think of other things. I'm into a lot more anime and stuff than him.
I think there's a lot of shows, because we do share a lot of interests when it comes to movies and TV shows, but there's a lot of things that you watch that I haven't watched or probably won't watch, TV shows and movies. And I think of things like Cowboy Bebop. I mean, you've watched that like 100 times, and I've not made it all the way through yet. Not for any particular reason. I'm just not as into it as you are.
I'm ashamed of you for it.
You got
It's amazing.
way more into the Zelda games than I ever did.
Yeah.
I've played most of them, but like you played the Zelda games. And Zach was always into and always has been into a lot more of the building focused type of games. Any game that has level construction, the Little Big Planet series of games was huge for Zach growing up. And I just, when he first got started in a lot of that stuff, I would play with him where I could, but he far surpassed me, and those were just things I never had the patience that Zach has when it comes to level building games. Any game that involves some degree of level design or level building, I just never got into it to the same level Zach does.
It's interesting. Y'all's relationship very much kind of mirrors the relationship I have with my son. He's much younger. He's 13, but it's very similar. He's very much into building video games, Minecraft, things like that. And it's not that they're not interesting to me. It's just when I'm looking to game, it's a different experience. When I spend time sitting down to play video games now, which is far less than it used to be. I used to clock probably 2 to 3 hours almost every day playing multiplayer Halo with friends and all that kind of stuff. And now I game. Yesterday was the first time that I'd actually gamed for any real length of time, and we played Sea of Thieves. So, but it's really cool just to hear that there's a lot of similarities between y'all's relationship and the one that I have with my son. We're gonna grab a question from. Oh no, Jake, we hadn't gotten your answer yet. Let's get your answer. How did you get into gaming?
So Zach kind of mentioned it a little bit. I played. Actually, Hero Quest was my first foray into D&D. I used to work at in the Midwest in sort of Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. There's a chain of stores called Meijer. They're a big box store, think Walmart, but more regional. And in the very early 90s, I worked in a toy department there. And we bought, our crew was really tight. And so we bought the Hero Quest board game, and we brought it over to our friend's house. We set it up and we started playing. And we very quickly played through all of the however many adventures, a couple dozen adventures in that. And we're like, I wish there was more to this. And I remember Jason, our friend, who would later become my first DM, saying, let me tell you about something called Dungeons and Dragons. I could not tell you the first character I played. I could not tell you what adventure, anything except that the oldest of us was 23. I think I was 19 at the time. And he played a Drow Ranger. And the DM described an NPC coming down the stairs, rolled the dex save and failed. And the entrance, the first ever DM narration I had was, you hear the sounds at the top of the stairs of somebody, I'll be down in a moment. And then you hear, ooh, ah, oh, ah, ooh, ah, that didn't hurt. Ah, that didn't hurt. Ooh, ah, that didn't hurt. Oh, that hurt. That was my first interaction with the game. And pretty much the only thing I remember from that game. And then I played, when I was in the Army in the 90s, I played off and on. And when I left the Army in 98, somewhere shortly after that, I remember just getting rid of, I probably gave away, I wish I knew what I did with them. My old dice, threw away all my old character sheets and stuff. How was I supposed to know what was in the future? And I didn't even think about D&D really until probably around 2012, when some new friends I had met, somebody said, I think you'd be a good DM. Somebody who had played through all the way through third edition, and fourth edition at the time, very complex rule set, very different game. But I learned it. I started running some 4E games, and that's when the D&D Next playtest came out. And I'm like, ooh, this is kind of cool. I have a chance to be a part of a version of D&D from the very beginning. And that was it. I started DMing 5th edition, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And I guess the rest is history. It could be another whole hour or two podcast talking about the numerous adventures since then.
Yeah, I was going to say couldn't get enough of it, because I'm pretty sure that might still be the case.
Right. Can't get enough of it.
No, man, I totally understand. Again, I've been playing, pretty steadily on a weekly basis for the most part for the last 22 years with my home group. And we've alternated games here and there, but mostly it's been D&D 3.5 or 5th edition. So I totally understand. And then once I found gaming online, like,
yeah, I want to elaborate a little bit more on Zach's story of getting into it, because
sure, please do.
When I very first, Zach may not remember this, but when I very first talked about D&D and offered to get him in, he wasn't interested. For quite a while, I don't know how long, but for a few months, it was just a lot of, I don't know. He was 12, typical preteen. I'm not interested, whatever. But I think what was happening is because I was going and playing with my home group, which was one of the people is Dwight, who Jeremy, but our whole group of friends. And we had just started in the Lost Mine of Fandover, and Dwight was our DM at the time. And after the first session, I said, "Hey, would you guys be cool if I invited my son next time?" And they're like, "Just so you know, we are not changing our behavior because you're bringing a 13-year-old to this game." I'm like, "No, that's cool. That's cool. He's on Reddit. He knows what's up." And I also said his mom doesn't know he's on Reddit. But Zach joined us in that game, and that was almost 9 years ago. And we were just yesterday or today talking in our group chat about getting together for the first time in a long time to play. I think at least since last year. I think we tried one last year. But obviously our game, our last in-person game really was right before everything shut down in 2020. And so we often have joked that Zach was brought up by 8 dads. 8 very large middle-aged men were Zach's best friends and dads for a long time.
That's awesome.
And we have never told his mother most of what goes on at those games.
Well, guess what? I hope she doesn't watch the show.
She will not watch this. Not because I won't let her. She has no interest in it.
That's fair.
Gaming
I'll
is something
take
that
it personally
that my wife's ex-mom has no interest in.
That actually brings up one of my first talking points, and that is, while the tabletop role-playing game hobby has been around for nearly 50 years, its history is not without some pretty major issues. So just as with personal growth in us as human beings, I think it is very important to be able to identify the issues that have been in and around gaming for so long, and then remove them as much as possible. So, Jake, what I'm curious about is, how mindful did you find yourself whenever you first ushered Zach into the hallowed halls of gaming?
So I think that fortunately I've never really had to worry about masking anything or code switching or even consciously making adjustments to anything when Zach started joining in our games or being a part of this world. Because I think I've always been pretty transparent and pretty genuine in my presentation of who I am and what my beliefs are. I don't present myself at home in one way and then go over to my friend's house and all of a sudden I'm an asshole, at least I don't think so. So I think I've been able to lead by example. And ultimately the group that we played with, that Zach did most of his initial gaming with for a few years, are all similarly minded. Not to say that we aren't, you get a bunch of guys together that are, having, it's a home game. It's definitely not something we would stream, but definitely there's, I just think being genuine and leading by example. I, not to embarrass you, Zach, but to gush for a moment, I'm very proud of who Zach is based on who he's grown into. He's going to be 22 this year. He's close to graduating college. He has an amazing group of friends that he is with constantly online when they're not in school. Some of them are in chat now. But I think the seeing the friendships Zach has developed and the way Zach is, and even the way he cares about his friends, shows me that I did something right. That I'm very proud to see, who he's become and stuff. So stop it, Jeremy. You're not supposed to ask me questions and to make me tear up. I'm proud of my son, and I'm proud to say it.
I'm very happy to hear that, man. That's an extremely endearing thing to hear a father say. I love it because I very much feel the same way about my son. I'm very proud of the young man that he's starting to turn into, and I'm not ashamed to say it whatsoever. And he's a huge nerd, which makes me so happy. But no, and I think, like you pointed out something really great about the hobby, about role-playing games is, and I'm going to talk about it here in a little while, but the relationships that we form at the table are really special. And they're cultivated experiences. Usually, the relationships are honed over usually a long period of time. And it's awesome to see that he has taken that, perhaps maybe either away from you on a personal level, or maybe it is even something that has been reinforced at the very least at the gaming table, is carefully cultivating the relationships that he develops with other people. It's a good quality to have. So good on you, Zach.
Wow.
So to flip that question, Zach, what was the most shocking thing whenever you sat down at the table?
Shocking in what sense?
I was going to say, you might have to clarify that. Shocking that you can share on this podcast.
Shocking that, holy crap, that's my father.
Again, in what sense am I being shocked here?
Careful with the brush you're painting me with here by what you're not saying. You're going to undo everything I just said.
There's always a moment, or maybe it's just me, but there's always a moment when, as a child, that you see your parent in a different light for the first time. They're obviously still your father or your mother, or what have you. But there's always that one moment where you're like, okay, they're a human being that has their own things going on outside of just being dad.
I just remember in our game with all the guys, he was playing this goblin. We were all playing goblins. That's the thing. We're like this goblin group. His character was a draconic sorcerer named Threek, who was so obsessive about dragons. And we found an egg. And I think his character was very convinced that it was a dragon egg and wanted to raise it as his own. And there was a moment where our friend Brad's character stole the egg and wouldn't tell him where it was, and eventually made it into an omelet. But I remember Dad his character being very like obsessed with, I gotta have this egg. I need it. What did you do with the egg? You know, very obsessive. And it was just, I've always remembered that because it was really funny when it happened. Like the session, session where that happened ended with Brad's character refusing to tell about where the egg was, and then like the next time we played a month later or whatever, he was eating an omelet or whatever. But I don't know. It's hard to find a specific moment other than just generally seeing him take on different characters as a player and playing alongside him was just fun, and it wasn't a kind of thing that we'd ever done before, you know, because I'd grown up playing games with him, playing video games, but we were always at each other's throats because we're both horrible at playing co-op games together.
Ironically, we do not play co-op games well together at all.
No.
Co-op video games. We are terrible.
But I remember
I hear that as well.
Just getting to play with him at the table, just kind of gradually there was this new perspective of like, oh, that's cool, you know.
Well, I think that's a good example. I think it's a perfectly good example of kind of what I was talking about seeing him outside of the usual perspective, you know, of the usual framework of just being, you know, dad, you know, authoritarian, or dad, you know, fellow video game player. It's a new side of him as a person, and I think it's a really cool moment whenever you realize that with a parent. Speaking of really cool, we have a question gamed together. Tell me or us about your best and worst gaming moments that you have shared.
So I'm gonna pick on you with the worst. It's a twofer because they happen pretty much at the same time. So one of the things that happened with Zach as a new player, in with a bunch of guys that don't pull their punches and don't censor themselves, was Zach. You know how it is when you're with a group of friends. You take turns on who gets razzed or picked on for whatever it might be. Well, for that first time, it was Zach when it came to rolling dice, because the way Zach rolled dice was to sort of toss it, and it wouldn't really roll. It would just sort of land on the table.
There wasn't a lot of room on the table, okay? I didn't want it to go off. I just wanted it to land right there.
So that's something we've messed with him about, and something that happened that same night, and for many nights after, and to this day, 9 years later, we still pick on him about, is his first character he played with us was a barbarian that he always forgot to rage. So, and it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to play this guy that doesn't know how to rage. It's just, he just didn't know that was the thing he could do.
Okay, you know how when you play a video game, you get the rocket launcher, right? And it's like, this rocket launcher does 1,000 damage. And you're like, okay, this is a great resource. I'm going to save it for an important boss fight. Well, I did that with rages because I was like, it's a limited resource. I get it back when we rest, and I don't know how long we're going to rest for, so I never raged. And then I was like, you know, I want my character to have armor. Can I be a fighter instead? And our DM was like, yeah, sure. So I never raged. What of it?
I will counter that with the best moment, and I love every year when it shows up in my Facebook memories. It's just on the other side of this wall right here is our dining room, and there is a photo of Zach sitting behind the DM screen with graphing paper in front of him, the gaming paper laid out and some stuff drawn, and a selection of our friends. There was me and Dwight and our friend Ron, and a couple other people, and it was Zach's first time ever not only DMing, but DMing an adventure he had created himself.
That's awesome. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I remember that adventure. It was poorly made. It was so poorly made.
I remember immediately getting taken out by an intellect devourer, and then you realizing just how powerful monsters can be.
That's how you
No,
learn.
that's really
man.
cool.
That's how you learn.
Yeah.
That's
my
an
best and
awesome
worst.
story. Hell yeah.
Do tell, young
Oh,
Zach.
I've got a good one.
Oh, here we go.
Dad, I don't
Dish.
know if it's near you. If you could show the
Yeah, I'm gonna grab it. I knew you were gonna go for that.
You knew it.
I love that.
I think you ought to show off. The first character I played with you is your character, a Minotaur bard named Florian. He had a flaming sword and a lute, and man, did we hate him. He was very.
Why. Everybody hated this bard, and I don't know why.
The applicable word, I think, is douchey. He just came off as kind of a jerk, kind of full of himself. And so we're moving through this dungeon. There's a narrow tunnel, and in classic D&D, anything, there's a spike pit. Got to get over that. How do you get over a spike pit? Do a jump or something. Be creative with it. You know, any number of ways. I teleport, misty step, anything. Florian, the bard, jumps over it and makes a roll, and the DM's like, all right, you jump over it. And then he's like, and I do a flip. So the DM's like, well, acrobatics, roll acrobatics. And he rolls acrobatics after having landed the jump, basically. It was in the bag. And he rolls a natural 1. And now he's at the bottom of a spike pit, dying, and we have to pull him out.
9 years later, I still get crap about it.
Yeah, every time it's like, oh, maybe you should do a flip too.
Yep.
So
Dwight's done that on stream. Said, hey, do you want to do a flip?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Wait, was that your best or worst moment for me?
You decide. I gotta think of see, that one was locked and loaded, but I have to think of a this is gonna sound bad. I have to think of a good one. What I mean to say is there's so many, right? So I remember very fondly of when I was doing a school project, and it was D&D related. It was my senior year. And so I wanted to answer the question, what's the allure of D&D, right? And we had to do an activity outside of school for it with a professional. And so my professional was my dad, because he's the only person I knew related to D&D. And, you know, he has some presence online. So I think that qualified. It worked. I got an A in the project. But for the activity, he has this adventure he created called the Tomb of the Mummy Lord. You might have heard of it. It's kind of awesome. It's kind of legendary. There's the remnants of a giant pyramid in our house somewhere still. And so I asked if he would run it for me and my friends, and I would record it on video. And I just remember that. That was a cool moment of kind of getting to go, hey, this is my dad being a cool DM. Because I remember the second we all sat down at the table and we were all ready and we had like some pizza or whatever, and we were just getting into it. All of our characters were made, and he starts off with 1,000 years ago, and it does this great narration, and all my friends kind of were like caught off guard. We're like, oh, and it was fun. And then we had a good time. And then we didn't finish that game, but I got all the footage I needed. But I just remember that fondly, and I'll still watch the video I made from that project, just because I also interviewed him for that in the exact room he's in right now, and asked him a bit about D&D. So some of the questions you're asking, I remember his answers to, because they were very similar. But that's just a fond D&D moment.
Did you just one up Jeremy?
No, that's not at all.
It's not hard to do, honestly.
No, I could never. I just need to say.
It's like, well, actually, I asked these questions first. I'll have you know.
That's not what I meant. No.
I have recorded video.
Zach's the interview hipster.
I have a video.
I was asking my dad questions about D&D before. It was cool.
Yeah, Yeah, yeah. Seconds.
No,
How's sloppy seconds, Jeremy?
oh my god.
How
Wow.
bad?
Yeah,
That's my boy.
That escalated. All right, we're gonna
It
move right
escalated
along
quickly.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, this parachute is a knapsack. Get us out of here, Jeremy.
Afford. So we have another question from the audience. It's kind of tangentially related, not to that terrible segue, but to what we were talking about just before. And that is from Prince Loser. And they ask, I would love to know how much of Zach's DMing style he would say is potentially influenced by his dad, as well as how they would say their styles are for both DMing and play differ.
This is a great question. It's a great question from a very dear friend of mine who I'm glad tuned in. I can definitely speak on the fact that so I have a tier list of DMs that I've played under. Obviously, Christopher Perkins is at the top because well, I haven't played under him, but DMs I know of. Christopher Perkins is at the top because I'm a huge King fan. But right number 2 is my dad. It's very close. It's very close. But the way my dad DMs, I've played under a few. I haven't played under a ton of DMs, but I've seen a variety of styles enough to know, what you want to look for, what makes a game more fun, I guess you could say. And he has this quality about his DMing style that I really, really try to capture when I run it, which is the ability to just keep things moving. His game is always going. It's very well. It ties into his production skill. It's like with like any stage production, the show must go on. So if there's some sort of questionable rule call, usually the decision is just whatever works in the moment anyway, and then you move on. And I think that makes the game more fun, and I think that makes the game, it kind of goes faster when you're not getting stopped up. It's fine to get stopped up and look things up, and a lot of the time you have to, but I feel like he has really good flow, and the flow is something that I look for or try to capture when I run a game. The flow is one. There's also just a lot of flavor with it, where it's when something happens, there's some sort of flavorful introduction to like a town or something where it just kind of makes it more pleasant and more well presented, I guess. If any of that makes any sense. But that is
Yeah,
how I would say he
100%.
has influenced the way I try to run D&D. Whether or not I succeed is a totally different question, but that's the goal.
Yeah, pacing is tough, and yeah, your dad definitely has really good pacing whenever he runs games. And again, like you're talking about cinematic, descriptions and things like that. Your dad runs a very vivid game with a lot of descriptions that help immerse you as a player. That's one of the reasons why I've enjoyed playing with him for going on 4 years now, is because he does such a good job of keeping things kind of fresh, even though it may be the God, I don't know, 150th time that we've sat down to do a stream or whatever. So those are both very good qualities to look for in a DM and to inherit. I guess you could
call it inheritance. There are two others I don't want to forget, if I may, that popped into my head. One of which I remember, the second which I'm hoping will come back to me as I describe the first. Man, I really did lose that other one. Okay, so there's one other quality that my father, when he runs games, when he starts campaigns, anytime, he always makes sure to do two things: to have a session 0 where everyone is prepared and you get everyone on board and on the same page. And he's very conscious about using safety tools, making sure that everyone's okay and comfortable and everything. And I look to that, and I always make sure to do that as best as I can as well. I've never run a campaign where I didn't have a session 0, and I try to remember about safety tools and being very clear, about people's boundaries, stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to have fun with friends. It's no fun if someone ends up uncomfortable and they weren't prepared because of a shortfalling on my part. You know, I wouldn't like to run a game where that happens. And so I look to what my father does, and I try and do that as well.
Yeah, I think session zeros, just to land on that for a second, have become increasingly important to me, because I think the trap we fall into is, especially when we're playing with friends, is we assume we know all of our friends. And yeah, you may know them, but you don't necessarily know what they're dealing with at any given moment. And having that open communication and those safety tools in place can prepare you for something that you just didn't know about. I've had very recently in games where I was narrating something and it had never even occurred to me that it could be a problem. And a player, mid narration, I received a PM saying, I'm not comfortable with the direction the story is going. And I mean, while I'm narrating, I'm typing to them, okay, give me a minute. And I changed gears on the fly and redirected that narrative flow, and then checked in with them again and said, is this better? And they responded, yes, thank you. And it was something I couldn't have anticipated, but because they knew the safety tool of being able to private message me and say, I'm not comfortable with this, and know that I would see it, hear it, and do something about it, was important and is important to me. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of catch the last half of that last question, which was about how do our DM and play styles differ? What I wanted to mention on that is something that Zach does as a DM that I don't do. And I wish I did better. I have gotten better, but I don't do anywhere near like this. And it's just my brain is not wired that way. When Zach has a game, I'll often stop by to talk to him or something. And he has pages of notes open. He's got D&D Beyond open. He is writing scene descriptions. He knows what the adventure is that he's running, because he's read through it multiple times. He's made notes on the changes he needs to make and what affects what characters because of this, that, and the other thing. And whether it's an original adventure or it's a pre-published or a hybrid of those. And oftentimes I can hear, he'll read through, and that's something I do too, read through certain things, but I hear him, trying out voices and just getting ready for the session. And I don't think anything other than, God, I wish I was organized, because I am not.
No, I'm more getting embarrassed better when I practice voices and I know you can hear me.
But you shouldn't be, because you do it online with us all the time.
Yeah.
But that's something I've watched change in Zach too. I watched that for over the years of gaming, that initial embarrassment that I think a lot of us feel, anybody that doesn't have a stage background, and even some that do, they struggle with that. I saw a comment from somebody saying that they sometimes feel embarrassed doing role play aspects. And that's perfectly valid. You're making yourself vulnerable to a certain degree by suddenly you're pretending to be somebody that you're not. And maybe this person has a different accent, a different voice or mannerism or whatever. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to do voices. You don't have to talk in the first person. You do whatever's comfortable for you. But I've seen over the years, Zach morph from that, being kind of nervous and stuff, and building his initial characters based on things he knew, which were characters based on video game models, like a hero character or a villain character in a video game, to creating rich, vibrant characters that have a personality all their own. And as soon as he sits at a table with people he doesn't even know that well, thinking like when he guested on the Dawnbringers for a long arc, all of a sudden he's just slipping into this character and playing this character out, and became an important part of that arc for more than a dozen sessions. I want to say it was close to 15 sessions that you played in that.
That sounds about right.
I think so. So yeah, that was, I wanted to say a little bit on the talking about the comfort levels and just seeing the differences between us off of that last question.
Yeah, absolutely. And to touch on something that each of you kind of brought up, and it's something that I've touched on before a lot in the series, and that's the two things that I think are the most important for any game master to have, and that is comfort and communication. If you are comfortable in what you're doing and you have good communication skills with the people at your table, then you're going to run a great game. Plain and simple. And it doesn't mean, again, that you show up in bunny slippers and pajama pants. I mean, if that's the way that your table runs, then that's great. But what I mean by comfort is like just understanding that you have strengths and weaknesses just like everybody else, and you prepare what you need to support you in your weakness, and you rely on your strengths, and you have to be honest about those things. And if you are honest about those things and you're comfortable, then you're going to run a great game because you're not worried about the dozens of things that might go wrong and all this kind of shit. You're just having fun. And that's really what the focus is about. And then communication is because every relationship is based around its level of communication. If you have a healthy level of communication, then the relationship can be healthy. If you do not have a healthy level of communication, then that relationship will never, ever be a healthy relationship. Plain and simple. And that covers everything from father to son, to spouse, to friends, to coworkers, to people that you sit at the gaming table with. So those are the first two things that I tell everybody to focus on. Get comfortable and work on your communication skills. And the rest of it usually will come along somewhere, in the experience. So it's awesome that that you both have kind of brought up those same kind of points separately. So thank you. Let's see. Zach, I have a question for you. What do you recall thinking about your dad's hobby before you started playing? What was the biggest thing? Well, I guess I already asked the second part. What was the biggest thing that surprised you once you started playing? But what was it in your mind before you started playing? What changed once you actually sat down to start playing?
That's an interesting question. I mentioned before how when my dad describes something, it kind of becomes this like legendary thing, right? So D&D, before I knew how to play or anything like that, was just this arcane thing that you would do, and from it emerged these great stories of characters and empires and whatever else I remember hearing about. So it was all kind of just this cool stuff. Like the ideas were all fascinating, but I didn't know where they came from. I didn't know how that kind of thing formed, and getting into it. And when I started actually playing, I do this a lot with most anything. If it's new, I'll just kind of observe, which is hard to do when you're participating at a table. But definitely early on when playing, I was quieter, I guess, because I wasn't quite sure how to get to those points I had heard. How to get to the cool stuff. It was just kind of watching and waiting. And at a certain point in playing, you kind of realize that. You kind of realize that it just comes from an idea that you have, that you're like, hey, I want to try this out. A lot of time you come to the DM and you're like, hey, I want to do this cool thing. And then you do it. And I think that the core of that and realizing that is realizing that at the table, there's just a lot of freedom. I remember my dad described D&D to me as like Skyrim, but you can do anything. I remember hearing that and being like, oh, that's interesting. But and you could do anything part of it. There was more to it, which is, you have to realize that there is a freedom inherent with it. So I think that the big change between hearing about it and actually getting to play it was realizing that there was this freedom and learning how to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a struggle that a lot of new players face. Is what do you mean I can do anything? But that's not the way that games typically work. And I mean, there are definitely confines, within the rules and things of Dungeons and Dragons. But one of the beauties of a game like D&D or any role playing game is the ability to say, no, I don't like this rule. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work for what we're trying to do. So we're just not going to observe that rule.
Don't get me started on Electrum.
I'm wearing my Electrum underwear.
Not the Electrum.
But that's kind of the beauty of it, is in the long run, there are no invisible walls. There are no doors that aren't actual doors. Well, unless they're mimics, I guess. But anyways, it's not as a boundary typically. And you can be rewarded for your ingenuity, using a spell in a way that isn't technically by the book, but it fits the situation that you're in really well and makes for an awesome moment. And for there to be an adjudicator, like it's sitting at the table to say, yes, that's okay. Instead of it being left up to, whatever parameters were set by the programmers that built the thing, 4 years ago.
It brings an almost quantum aspect to the game, at least especially the way I run, and I know a lot of people run games, is the act of asking the question, can I do this? And the DM saying yes alters that adventure. And I think a lot of that depends on what you run, but I ran a session last night where a series of events that involved random dice rolls, character narration, and me describing certain things while the characters were trying to figure out what they were going to do, whether or not they were going to go in this building. What started as an elementary school, because they were hemming and hawing about going in and it kept shifting. By the time they went in, it was a Institute for the Culinary Arts. And that shaped what happened from then on. And it completely altered what could have happened if it had been an elementary school or a university that they had gone into, because of the asking the questions and the dice rolls and everything else, and just my narrative style of just rolling with it. All of a sudden they're in a culinary institute disguising themselves in new uniforms of a variety of culinary students and trying to pull one over on the headmaster.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the beauty of collaborative storytelling and leaving aspects of it up to develop organically and in the moment. But a lot of that also comes with a certain amount of trust. There has to be that trust with the people that you're sitting at the table with, that they're not going to take advantage or abuse, the vulnerability that you're giving up, or the power of creating something within the narrative, that they're not going to take it and go, run way out there with it and, name something McButtstuffin or, whatever. And, there are players who do that. And again, sometimes that's fun and it's a fun experience to have. But if that's not what everybody else at the table is going for in that moment, and they can't step into the moment and keep pace with everybody else and kind of match step, it can be jarring. So I think having people that you trust at the table running the game and, sitting across from you rolling dice, that can go a long way towards being able to put yourself out there more, or open yourself up more to organic story development.
Yeah.
So we have one of the preloaded questions from a friend named Nathan, and he asks, at what age should you introduce TTRPGs to a child?
As early as possible. Honestly, I think it depends on the child. I know that I'm going to elaborate a little bit more, but as parents, you have to be in tune with your children's ability to, whether it doesn't even have to be reading comprehension, because there are games for very young children. But their ability, you know what your kids are capable of doing, how their imagination play works, how do they play with their toys and things like that. That if this is something you are looking at and you have young children, you kind of keep an eye on that, and you just sort of know. I think because Zach was already a little bit older, was around 12, 13 when I started playing the game again. It wasn't a question of is he old enough for this? In my mind, he had already sort of checked off some of those boxes of having the imagination and the understanding and the maturity, really, to be able to handle being put at a table with a bunch of middle-aged men to play pretend. But I think, I've been asked the question as it pertains to young cousins or nieces and nephews that have, their own children. And I have a granddaughter who's only 3 months, but I'm already wondering, when can I start introducing stuff? And, you also want to have a mind for not forcing, it on kids. I don't think I ever forced D&D on Zach. It was always, hey, this is something I think it would be cool. And if you want to do it, that's cool. And when you're ready, and eventually that happened. But there are so many types of games you can play with very young children. I mean, Dwight, I know for a fact, ran a couple of his kids through a short D&D adventure with when his daughter was like 6. And I remember him texting me and telling me that they met a dragon and she gave the dragon pizza and they had a great time together. Her thought was not about how to kill the dragon. It was, I want to be friends with it and give it pizza. And they became best friends. And I remember him texting me that. And they rolled dice, just for fun. And, the stakes and consequences were really low. But yeah. I guess that would be sort of my roundabout way of answering that question.
Yeah, I think it does, at least for me, come down to a lot more about the maturity and attention span of the kid in
attention
question.
span.
There are role-playing games that you can play that are very fast, that are quick. And I think that would be probably a better place to start than with something like Dungeons & Dragons, because to really play D&D, it's going to take a couple of hours at least. And that's even before you get into things like character creation and any of that kind of stuff. So I definitely think that knowing the individual likes of the child and kind of like what they can handle as far as maturity and time commitment, things like that, attention span, and imagination is another good one to bring up. I think it's definitely kind of more of an individual thing than a fixed age kind of thing.
Definitely, because case in point, Zach and I were in the living room. We were trying to solo Lost Mine of Phandelver. He had basically created a sidekick character before sidekick characters actually had rules. And they were approaching Cragmaw Castle, and I had printed out the maps, and we were using miniatures, and I had decided to involve his sister, Chloe. And Chloe could not focus on the game. She didn't really have an interest. She wasn't really sure what she was doing. And there came a point where she got up and left, and we kind of didn't notice that she had left right away. And we kept playing, and then we're like, oh, okay, I guess she's not going to play. And that was really the only time Chloe's ever attempted to play D&D with us. And that was, so she would have been like 11, maybe 12, and just knew. But now She's much older, and she still doesn't have any interest in playing. But her husband just told me the other day, I've been watching a bunch of videos. I'm learning what a murder hobo is, and I'm learning what metagaming is. And I'm like, no, you are watching the wrong videos.
No, new videos.
But
oh, no.
He's told me he very much has an interest in learning how to play the game. So yeah,
That's awesome.
it's definitely about knowing, and it was the fact that I kind of knew she wouldn't stick with it, but we gave it a shot anyway, on the off chance that she saw it, liked it, and wanted to keep playing. She did not.
Yeah, and it is a hobby that is not for everyone. I'll be the first person to admit it. Like, I think everybody should try it at least once, so that you know for certain whether it is something that you could find entertaining or not. Especially because there are so many games out there, and they run so differently from one another, and they give you different experiences and cover different genres and the emotional spectrum. You can find almost anything, any kind of experience out there. So if you like to read, if you like to watch movies, then more than likely you would enjoy some form of a role-playing game at some point. But there are some people that the hobby just does not hold any interest for, and that's perfectly fine. Like, it's just the way that it is. But do you have an opinion, Zach, about what age you should introduce a kid to?
As a recent child,
as a recently recovered child,
as I could give my insight, I would say, because obviously it depends on the kid. You can never make a blanket, oh, it's got to be this for a kid. You got to meet the individual needs. But for me, I think it was D&D was an opportunity to be social and have a lot of fun socially in a time where I was a little less than social. And it may have had a kind of, because when you get that, then you can kind of learn and start to be more social outside of D&D. So I think in that regard, it can be a really good tool for socializing. And I just think it's another tool that, if the case is right, maybe introduce your kid to D&D, give them that as an opportunity.
There's a reason that organizations like Game to Grow, who we worked with recently, that they use D&D. They developed an entire starter set, basically, called Critical Core, that is around working with neurodivergent youth and kids and teens on the autism spectrum, to help them to learn how to deal with things like anger or other emotions, how to communicate, how to open up. And it's not just Game to Grow. There's organizations like Clinical Role and numerous others that use gaming or some form of gaming as therapy, really.
Yeah. I've heard of stories of gaming being used by therapists going back probably at least 10 years, and being really interested in hearing that, because psychology is another thing that I'm very interested in. I'm much more of a novice compared to gaming, but it is interesting to me. Human psychology has always been something that I find fascinating, and where the overlap between it and gaming is really a cool part of the hobby that I kind of stumbled into without realizing that it was something I liked about the hobby. And so to now know that it's being used as a direct tool in that field is very, very cool to me. It makes me really happy that it's helping people that way. That this thing that I adopted as merely a hobby that I really enjoy doing is also helpful and therapeutic to people. Yeah, it makes me very, very proud to have been a gamer as long as I am. So cool. All right. What next? Okay. So the relationships, we kind of talked on this a little bit before. The relationships that we form at the table have this kind of capacity to become strangely strong, and oftentimes intimate on an emotional level. The camaraderie that we tend to attribute to things like squadrons of soldiers during wartime, or the close ties that we might experience as siblings. How has gaming together altered your relationship?
Zach is the first
Too hard.
person
Okay.
that I want to run my ideas by. Zach is almost always the first person that I go to whenever we finish a game session, especially if it's something that Zach and I brainstorm together. Zach has for I would say literally for years, if I'm stuck on what to do with something, sometimes it's just knowing that I can talk to Zach and he's going to know what I'm talking about. There's been times where I've started to pitch something to him and then I get that far off look and I stare off into the middle of distance, which is really disturbing when I'm driving. But that's usually just the act of sort of soundboarding it to him that's helped me to sort of, oh, wait, I know what to do. But if I need help with something or I'm just running ideas by, Zach will immediately pick it up and then we start batting it around and brainstorming together until we come up with something that we did that a year or two ago where we came up with an entire idea of an adventure based entirely around a small town that we drove through that said, welcome to, whatever town in backwoods Michigan, but below the sign it said home of the 1983 all-star champion Tommy Higgins or whatever. And we were like, and we wound up in a 2-hour drive, we wound up brainstorming an entire adventure that I wound up running as a charity event, which was something to do with something humble. Welcome to humble town, home of the legendary Lucky Haskins or something like that. I know Lucky Haskins was the name. Lucky Haskins was the name.
Yes.
But that's one of the biggest things that D&D and tabletop has done. Zach and I have always been able to talk video games and talk about that kind of stuff just because video games have always been a part of his life, because he literally was, before he could even really crawl around, he was sitting in my lap while I, played PlayStation, because I'm father of the year. I was playing Grand Theft Auto 3. Baby Zach was on my lap, not knowing what's going on. But having D&D be a part of that, we were able to not even necessarily say, hey, I need you to help me with this thing, but both I can go to him or he will come to me just to tell something we're excited about, that we are going to put our players through, or that a game that we ran or something that worked really well or that didn't work. I tell you this honestly, one of the most agonizing things as a DM and having Zach sort of fulfill this role for me was those 3 months that he guested on Dawnbringers. I couldn't talk to him about any of my ideas because I didn't want to spoil the games. And it's the same thing when I run games for my friends. They're the ones I want to tell stuff, and now they're in the game. So now who do I talk to? My wife won't listen.
See, I'm very lucky in that regard because my wife does play in our home group. So not for things with our home group, but for things that I'm running online, she is my sounding board. And she is very well read. She's read more books than I can count. And so she has a very good understanding of narrative development and story elements and things like that. Even though she doesn't typically run games, she has all of that knowledge in her head. And when I start kind of prodding her with questions about, well, this is kind of what I want to do, and I can't figure out how to get there, what do you think? And she starts spitballing ideas back at me, and that volley, that back and forth, ends up becoming usually much, much better than it would have if I had just developed it on my own. So I totally understand what you're talking about. And yes, when she's playing in a game and I can't do that with her, it is very difficult.
Yeah, I feel the same way because I've run a few different campaigns for friends of mine, and just I get really excited about the ideas, and I'm like, oh man, I'm so excited about this thing that you'll see eventually, but I really want to tell you. But I do share the same feeling as my dad with having, because I'll come to him anytime I have a thing. Recently, I was totally stumped because I backed myself into the corner in a D&D campaign of I have to run a courtroom session because the adventurers are in a lawsuit now and they're trying to absolve someone, which is always great. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how courts work. So I was like, I don't really know what to do. And he was like, just watch the most famous courtroom movie scenes for inspiration. And so I looked up a few.
Steal.
And I just was like, all right, I like that. Zoop, I'm going to take that. And then I kind of broke it down, and that got the ball rolling. I've done things before. I remember one time I was running a campaign and the players were going to cross a rapid river. And the idea was there was going to be this like wizard who had a satchel full of spell scrolls, and they're all for like some flying spell. I don't remember. And the idea was she uses one, flies over the river, and then a big monster just tears her apart and pulls her into the river. And they're like, okay, well, we can't do that. And so I was like, what would be a good monster? And I remember Dad and I bounced some ideas off each other, and we eventually settled on that this part of the river was like we did like a combination of a water elemental and a water weird, and basically made it so that the river itself was like coming up and just tearing apart anyone who tried to cross it. And I still have that homebrew stat block somewhere, but I remember that as a fun moment of brainstorming with them.
CR5 River Elemental that I still use from time to time.
Yes, it's a good stat block.
I'm pretty sure that you've used it in the Dawnbringers at least once.
I did. I used it in the Orphan Makers adventure that we did
right.
as a one-off in Wildmount. You guys had to cross a bridge, and I've used that river elemental at least 3 different times.
It's good. It's good.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love those kinds of sessions where you can sit down and hash stuff out like that. And it is rare because most of the time the people that you're discussing those kinds of things with are the people that you sit at the table with. And so if you're the one who's coming up with those concepts, typically as the GM, then it is difficult to have somebody to kind of bounce that ball around with. So that's really cool. Another question from Nathan Joe Flannery. He asks, are there any good resources for D&D for young children?
I'm assuming that means like to run D&D for children? Or
I would assume
so. That is a good question. There are things like I think any of the starter sets, of which there are as of this Friday, there will be 3 of them with the new one coming out. They're geared towards beginner players. They're designed so that beginning players and DMs can get right into the game. So if you have a parent that's sort of filling that role as a DM and can help distill that even further, there's games like Monty Cook games. No Thank You Evil is one that comes to mind. But I think outside of like specific things, I think the best thing is to just I guess honestly, just do what I do with new players, like that are brand new to D&D, is don't worry about the rules. You just tell me what you want to do. I will tell you, I'll set up the scene. You tell me what you want to do, and then I'll tell you what you have to roll, or what rule applies to that. I would actually say one-page dungeon, not one-page dungeon, one-page RPGs like Honey Heist, A Familiar Problem, even to a certain extent, your Erasmus Expeditions, your Erasmus Expedition Engine. Geez, I'll get there eventually. Your expedition engines, which a lot of those you distill out of other similar systems. The whole point to it is you have a 1 or 2 page rule set that gives you some very simple guidelines that you could use as a model or use to run a kid through something. You find out what they're interested in. If their favorite thing is, I don't even know what's popular with kids shows right now. So I'm going to say from our childhood, if their favorite thing is He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, run Masters of the Universe Expedition Engine. If it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, run Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Expedition Engine. They're now making RPG rule sets for a lot of fandoms too. The Dragon Prince has recently been made in Cortex Prime.
Yep.
And there's a G.I. Joe RPG. And now, obviously, these aren't geared towards very young children. But the point is, there's a lot of resources out there. If you just figure out what it is you're looking for, I think you can very easily find something that would appeal to your own child's interests.
Yeah, I ran a couple of sessions, a handful of them or so, for my cousin's 3 kids and my son, and it was put out by Wizards of the Coast, and it's called Monster Slayers. It's created by an author. What is her name? I'm not going to be able to find it fast enough here. But I think it was an author who kind of first approached Wizards and had this made. And it's kind of a very simplified version of the rules, a lot more direct. And they loved it. They absolutely got into all the aspects of it and were really excited about, the fact that their character had this ability and this power and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's a good place to start with kids who might not have the attention span to sit down and really kind of dive into something as rules heavy as D&D itself is. But like you said, there's a ton of role-playing games out there that are just as easy as the game Monster Slayers. And they run the gamut of everything that you can possibly imagine. And then the beauty is that even if there's not a role-playing game directly tied to an IP that that your children might like, most of them are really easy to adapt, especially the simpler they are, into running whatever you might want to run. So I highly recommend doing that, because as a person who runs games, it's really useful to kind of get a look underneath the hood of the mechanics of the way role-playing games are built. And you never know what you might be able to kind of find over in one little small independent game that nobody's ever heard of that you really like and you can adapt to your other games.
Yeah, for sure. Is that the Monster Slayers Champions of Halcyon or something like that?
Yes, I think
that's talking about.
Yeah. I think that's it. I want to say the author's name was Margaret something, but I'm having trouble
It's not
finding
Margaret
it now.
Weiss, is it?
Oh, no, I don't believe so.
I was just curious. I was not familiar with that. That's something new I learned.
Yeah, it's a cute little game. It has some pre-gens with it, so it's really easy to kind of get up and going with it. And we ended up creating 1 or 2 characters outside of the pre-gens just because the kids kind of got to the point where they're like, well, I like this character, but I would rather play this other idea I had. And so it was easy enough to just figure out the way they put these characters together and then just make, other regions based on the same principles. It's a cool little game. Very quick to learn. Let's see. We have another question from Prince Loser, literally titled Another Question. Outside of traditional Dungeons and Dragons, what would you each say is your favorite system? Powered by the Apocalypse, Monster of the Week, etc., etc.
Well, I can answer mine while Dad thinks. I haven't played in a whole lot of systems. Oh no, it's a tie. It's a tie, so I'm gonna say 2. I've had a lot of fun playing Hyperspace D6, which is the hack by Matt Click for Star Wars. It's just super easy. It's just super easy. Like, I obviously my introduction to role playing games was with D&D. So, you've got your 7 types of die or whatever. But I've never played in a D6 system until I tried Hyperspace D6, and I just found that really fluid and easy to grasp. And the game I played was run by Matt Click, who's just an amazing DM. So, hey, look at that.
It's the first game I ever played.
Yeah, and the 5e hack for that is just really good. The second game, which is also a Matt Click joint, is Mecha Hack, which I've played in a number of times. I've played in games run by Dwight and run by maybe just Dwight. I don't remember. Dad, did you run a game for me in Mecha Hack or no?
No,
I don't remember. I can't.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. No, I've played a few. Yeah, no, I've played a few times because I played in the game we do with Dwight sometimes, and I played in Nate Adams' Mecha Dome stream, which was a lot of fun. And it's really fun. Getting to pilot mechs is super awesome, and they've got a great system for it. Very simple, easy to parse. So those are my 2 non-D&D favorite systems.
Yeah, both of those are very fun. I need to probably pick your brain actually about it. We've been trying to run Hyperspace D6 here with our home group, and we have one of the previous versions of it, and there's a lot about it that we don't understand. So we're looking at the newer, updated version, and I just haven't had time to sit down and look at it yet. But I'll probably pick your brain about it. But yeah, the Weston Games version of Star Wars, the D6 version, was the first game that I ever played, role-playing wise. It was in junior high school, and it was very much I played, but I had no clue what the hell was going on. And the people that did understand were not explaining what was going on. It was literally just, here's your dice, roll them, tell us what you get. So I played like a Wookiee who just ran up to everything and destroyed it, just tore it apart, which was a ton of fun. But yeah, and then Mecha Hack is a beautifully realized game. It's, like you said, it's very simple. It's very easy to pick up, but you can do a lot with it. And again, with it being kind of a simple system, you can really kind of tune the engine. I've run Mad Max with it. I've run like a kaiju style game that's similar to like Sunny's Edge from Love, Death, and Robots.
I played
I've run Halo. Yeah, you did, as a matter of fact. I've run several games of Halo with it, and it works well for all of those things with very little adjustment. So it's definitely an attestament to the strength of that game.
Yes.
What about you, Jake?
Look, I love pizza. And given the opportunity, I will eat pizza every single day. D&D is my pizza. I will always love and go back to D&D. 5th edition in particular, it is the perfect system for me. but that's not to say I don't play other stuff. There's 2 games that have emerged. So I like Mecha Hack. I like, even though they're still technically D&D, I like a lot of the 5e variants that have come out, third-party variants, a lot of them from Absolute Tabletop. So like the Oath of the Frozen King Adventure Kit, the Shadows over Drift Chapel Adventure Kit, which Zach has actually run some stuff in that. The Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, Lloyd Collins' Iscloft, Dice on Ice RPGs, Cryfoth, which is demons and deserts. So I like those variants of 5e, but going away from 5e, 2 systems that I really like are Call of Cthulhu and its variations. We're on hiatus for the summer, but for the last couple of years, we've been running a Call of Cthulhu Mythos Investigators monthly game on MTD with the same group of players, and we just rotate game masters every time a story arc is done. And I ran Tomb of the Mummy Lord as Curse of the Mummy Lord as a pulp Cthulhu. We're running I forget what it's called, but our next one is going to be a variation of Cthulhu that is set in a Western theme. So I really like that because I like getting into the really gritty horror. Most of the stuff we run on MTD is PG-13. We do full content warnings before this and let people know this is mature content. Things will get violent. Things will get graphic. And if you don't want to watch it, pick something else. Watch a VOD of one of our other games. But kind of in the same milieu, sort of, but on a different flavor completely. I love Kids on Bikes RPG. Kids on Bikes is sort of the game is, if you could say, hey, I want to play Stranger Things D&D, you could say, oh, well, the adventure that Mike ran in season 1 of Stranger Things is available on D&D Beyond. But no, I want to play as the kids. This is your game right here. This introduces the concept of powered characters that are controlled by a group of kids at the table. You can play it anywhere from like 7-year-old kids all the way up to you could be the adult of the group. Similar system would be like Tales from the Loop, which has more of a little more world building around it. I believe they've since made Kids on Brooms and Teens in Space variations of this same model. So yeah, this is a big departure from D&D with the rule set and everything, but I just love this because it's just fun saying, hey, it's 1980 something and your kid's spending the summer with your grandparents in Empire, Michigan, and you're pretty sure that all of the teachers on their summer break are a part of a cult. And then you run with it.
Yeah, I've had just one game experience with Kids on Bike.
I will fix that,
and it's a lot of fun. But I definitely want to run it because I ran it, and I'd never had any experience playing it or running it before. And I know that I dropped the ball on parts of it, but I would love the chance to play it under somebody who knows how to run it. It would be amazing. Because I'm very much of that genre. Stranger Things, Goonies, Stand By Me, Flight of the Navigator, E.T.
A little bit of Scooby-Doo in there.
Yep.
Which you've run and I've played.
I did. That was a really, really fun game using another system called Scream, which is meant to do slasher horror films. And that game was, the Scooby-Doo game caught in an actual slasher film. It was a lot of fun.
And you got your sister to play in that game.
And I did. Yeah, my sister played in that game.
Your sister was Daphne, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's not her name. That's the character she played. I was Scooby.
Yeah. Which was incredible. I think you were I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's I think that would probably be my answer is like, I've played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. The only edition that I haven't played at all is 4th edition. And I've played it a lot over the years. and it's definitely same as what you said. Like, it's my bread and butter. It's what I'm always going to come back to. When I start thinking about game concepts, 5th edition is what runs in my brain. That's the engine that it's built on. But I love other systems. I love finding new games and trying them. And again, like I said, taking little subsystems that I really enjoy about them and looking for ways that I might be able to even incorporate them in my D&D game. And
I want to say,
yeah,
in this forum, that you, in my opinion, are an expert when it comes to finding a new system, devouring it, understanding it, stewing on it, and distilling it into a way that you can teach a group of people how to play and then run an entire mini campaign off of without any of us ever seeing the actual rule set.
Thank you.
It is a very big strong suit of yours, because I've seen you do it more than once. And taking complex systems like Cortex, which it has a very unique mechanic of building dice pools from multiple locations, and you never made it feel like work. It felt like part of the narrative. It's just something I wanted to say in this forum, that you are very skilled at doing that. And if somebody wants to learn how to play a new game, find one that Jeremy is DMing, because he will make it easy for you to understand the rules.
I'll run a version of it. That's the best I can do.
But sometimes that's all it takes to pique somebody's interest into looking into it more.
Sometimes the training wheels might be held on with duct tape, but we'll give it a shot. But some of my favorites, I think, I don't know, it's a tough question to answer, because there are certain games out there that harness a very specific experience at the table. I wouldn't use a lot of other types of game systems to run a game like that Scooby-Doo slasher horror game, for example. There's just not a lot of other systems that would handle that well, I don't think. But Mecha Hack is definitely up there. Harbinger, I love Harbinger, which is kind of D&D adjacent. Fiasco is an incredible game of role-playing and relationships between people. It's unlike anything else. Dread is incredible for intense horror games. Very immersive. You play
intense
with a Jenga
horror
tower.
Games powered by a Jenga tower.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what?
Jenga tower. I have never seen a game mechanic that more quickly grabs you and sucks you in than a Jenga tower, because every time the situation starts to get tense, and it all hinges on whether or not somebody can pull that block out, and they touch the tower and it's wobbling, everybody at the table holds their breath. So it's very effective at what it does. 10 Candles is a really cool game, very immersive for kind of dark, spooky horror. What else? Cortex is a beautiful system. It's very complex, but what you can do with it is impressive for sure. So yeah, there's just a ton out there that I think are really great systems, and they're all worth checking out. Honestly, check them out. If you don't like them, put them on your shelf somewhere, and you can pull it out and go, "Hey, I have a copy of that weird game that so and so just mentioned." And again, even when you sit down at a table and have a bad gaming experience, it still teaches you something. You still can learn something from that experience to make your future game experiences better. So yeah. We have another question from Nathan Joe Flannery. He asks, when putting together a game for kids, where would you start and what would you include?
I'm giving you a chance to talk, Zach, because I've been talking a lot. But if you're thinking, I will throw in. I would say, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, I would start with, what are they interested in? If you're trying to get children to be interested in the game, the best place to start is, what are the things that they are most interested in? And 2, give them a dragon right off the bat. I don't mean like give them a dragon as like a animal companion or whatever, but have them meet a dragon, have them meet a giant. Kids more so than any others. I think as adults, especially those of us that have been playing a long time, we like the anticipation and the build up to those big encounters. Kids, they have, especially brand new to these kind of things, they have no basis for that. So give them a dragon right out of the gate. Give them a giant. Give them a giant riding a dragon. Give them a dragon riding a giant. Give them a beholder. Describe to them a big giant round thing with a big eye and a big mouth. And oh, by the way, it's got 10 more eyes floating around it. And in the same way that I rely on cinematic descriptions, because everybody knows movie, everybody knows television. You can use those things like camera moves, pushes, pulls, zooms, crash zooms, all that kind of stuff, because your players have that familiarity. What do your kids know? What do these kids watch? Whether it's what are the movies they're watching or the cartoons, or if they're watching certain, YouTube videos or whatever, talk their language, describe things in a way that they're going to understand. If they're really little, use those, that get really into that, describing the size of the dragon and the silly voices and all that kind of stuff, that anything that you can think of that's going to capture them. I would even say for very young children, I would actually say don't use things like miniatures. Not because of fear that they're going to, break them or whatever. I think it creates distractions on the table. But maybe have one or two that has nothing to do with a battle grid. But if you can say, the dragon flies in out of the sky and there he is. Now they can see it and they can picture it and you can describe it. Yeah, just give them that stuff. Make stuff up too. Make up monsters. Who cares? You're probably not going to be using the stat blocks that closely anyway with young kids.
I still don't, even with full-grown players.
I'm gonna roll this die. It doesn't matter. Yeah, he misses you. I rolled a nat 20. I legit just rolled a nat 20.
Use them all up.
No more. I'll save that for tomorrow and use it against you, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thorgarn needs it's Talmud.
See,
I just did that on purpose.
Okay. Sure. Likely story.
Even out of the game. For me, knowing just my experience running D&D in general, already this is kind of the rule, but any notes you could have prepared are going to go out of the window. Because when I run a game for non-children, I'll have a whole 2-3 pages of notes that are literally just a breakdown of where they're going to go here, they're going to go here, they're going to go here, they're going to go here. And they're going to get to here, and I'm going to mention a little goblin named Snoot, and they're going to want to know Snoot's backstory, and they're going to want to help Snoot with whatever Snoot's doing. And that's going to take up this much of the adventure, and then we're going to get to the next bullet point barely at the end. And that's with normal players. Now you're talking about a group of kids. My thought would be have very bare bones notes, some big set pieces, because that's something that I like to try and do, is have big set piece things that are going to happen. They're going to be a focal point or whatever. Really focus on those. Think about what would be a memorable moment and try and create those. And with kids, I imagine they'll say a lot of silly things. Take those silly things and put them into the game and show you have a part in what's happening here too. You also are aiding in the creation. So when you say a thing, it'll happen, and then you're like, "Whoa, it happened!" You know, that's what I would do if I was so brave as to run a game for very small children.
I would even say, building off of that, do exactly what I do in a lot of my games, which is I ask my players to contribute to the narration of what, that school building that I mentioned earlier existed because I asked a player, what building is here? When you land on this floating rock in space, what is the building that is here? And he made it a school. And so that also shaped where we went. So in my example of giving the kids a beholder or a dragon, when you describe this big dragon that you see before you, you can ask them, what color is it? How big is it? Whatever. Let them have a say in it and show that they can shape the world. What is the dragon's name? And they're, whether they give it a serious name or a silly name, that's the dragon's name.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes back to, again, communication. Like you said, speak their language. If your kids are really into, Disney movies or, Pixar movies or something, then, use similar storytelling techniques that are present from those kinds of films. Use tropes and cliches that have come up in those kinds of films. That's what's going to draw them in and immerse them. And that's what you want from any table full of players, whether they're children or not, or children at heart. That's what we want as players. We want to experience something that's going to grab us and suck us in really tight to what's going on in the moment and build that excitement and that tension and immerse us in the story that's going on. Even people who are really only interested in the combat side of the game, they may not want to role play their character, but they want their characters to be doing something that matters, that has an impact and that has an impact on them ultimately. And I think that if you pay attention to what it is that they're after from that experience at the table, even young kids, that you can deliver that on a more consistent basis as a game master. What is going on?
Nothing good.
Block. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I think it's good to know and understand what experience your players are expecting at the table. And again, that is just as true as if they were young children as it is fully grown adult players. If you understand their expectations, then you can deliver the experience that they're wanting better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another question here. As most things tend to do, gaming has changed in many ways as new generations have taken up the hobby. I'm curious to know, what are some changes that both of you have noticed in gaming?
Well, I can speak to very recent, because I remember getting into it when I was in high school, 20, whenever, 15, 16, 14, around then, which it was similar to how I would imagine, and I can't speak to this fully, but it felt like the D&D had imagined. We were sitting around a table playing D&D. We had a bunch of junk food on the table, that kind of thing. And with COVID recently, online D&D is like the only way I play now. Very rarely do I get together at a table to play D&D. It's something that I like to do when I can, but it's more convenient to do it online. The tools are there, and in the last few years, everyone was stuck at home and we all wanted to play D&D. So what do? We figured out how to make playing online really good. And now that's how I play D&D. I don't think I've run more D&D games on Discord than I've run on in person at a table. The tools of a computer, having a whole setup in front of you while you're DMing, is super valuable, and not something you can always do when you're running a game at a table, because I can't have multiple monitors set up at a table usually. At most, I have a notepad, a laptop, and maybe something important scrawled on a note sticky to my DM screen, versus I have D&D Beyond open with the stat blocks I need. I have an encounter tracking app here. I have tabs open with all of the character sheets for my campaign. I think that computers and playing online have hugely changed the way D&D works. And I've kind of seen that come to prevalence since I started, and it's been really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the biggest changes that I've noticed as well, especially in the last 5 years or so. The ability to play online has not only grown in accessibility, but also, like you said, just the things that it brings to the table. The literal tools that you can have at the table now that weren't really around before playing online became so much more prevalent. The ability to digitally track, characters' hit points and things like that, as you're playing. D&D Beyond, I don't use D&D Beyond very much, but I do whenever I play in the Dawnbringers. And the ability to look up what a magic item does, or a spell, or an ability, basically just at a single click is very, very nice. It streamlines the process a lot. What about you, Jake?
I mean, echoing a little bit that I have an entire suite of virtually every 5th edition book sitting here behind me, and I haven't cracked any of them in a very long time because I use D&D Beyond so much that I've come to rely on it. Honestly, I would have to stop and think if you had me grab one of these character sheets and make a character just on paper with the books. It would take me a minute because I've done them on D&D Beyond for years. Not only that, but one other thing that everything, being able to play online has done is I can, once, of course, you get the scheduling lined up, I can play around the table with somebody from Seattle, Washington, Alberta, Canada, Mid-Texas, New Jersey, and Michigan, all in the same game at the same time. Georgia,
or Australia,
I don't want to leave Katie out.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have friends
Australia,
in Ireland, and Australia, and the UK, and we can all be around the table at the same time playing the game because of the internet, and even without D&D Beyond, we can still do that. My first online D&D games were before D&D Beyond, so I had the paper and pencil sheets in front of me, and we would roll dice, whatever. But I would say the other big thing for me, as somebody who grew up in the 70s and 80s, D&D was something that I got made fun of for that kind of stuff. I got bullied for liking that kind of stuff. Not only that, I grew up in the Satanic Panic, where it was considered evil and of the devil. And now we live in an age where you'd be hard pressed to bring up Dungeons and Dragons in a group of people, and even if their response is, "Oh, you mean the Stranger Things thing?" Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Somebody said something today about D&D. I mentioned before we went on, I was at a work conference, and somebody said something. I don't remember what it was, and I was like, "Well, I'm always prepared for D&D," and I pulled out 2 sets of dice that I threw in my backpack because I do not go anywhere without having at least 1 set of dice on me, because you never know when a D&D game is going to break out. And I could run an entire game of D&D with nothing but a set of dice and imagination. So I think that's the thing, just that it's become so socially accepted, but it's become a big part of the just pop culture. I mean, it seems like everybody knows what it is now, or at least has heard of it, and more people are interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that a little bit before we went live, even how much of a part of the cultural zeitgeist it's become. That's probably another one of the biggest changes that I've noticed as well. I didn't have to go through the Satanic Panic because I didn't start playing until probably '94, so it was all pretty well over at that point. But definitely was not a cool thing to do. But there wasn't much that I did that was a cool thing to do. But I really, really enjoyed it, and so I did it anyways, which is kind of my philosophy in life, I guess. But when I started playing in college, was really when I kind of took the deep dive, and so at that point, I was already who I was going to be, and I understood what I liked, and I just went for it. But here in the last, again, probably 5 years, maybe 10, where it's kind of become more socially acceptable, where the cool kids, quote unquote, do it. When we talked about this, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, all of those things becoming popular in media, and things like Critical Role and Stranger Things, specifically mentioning it, showing it, has done just incredible things for the hobby, and it makes my heart really happy and very full. So I'm glad that I saw that change happen in the overall public opinion of gaming. There's still a lot of people that don't understand it, but that's much better than where we were.
Right.
All right. So we have one more preloaded question. This one comes from Carol Dunster, and she asks, how do you deal with family members that get excited and start talking too much, or don't keep their attention on the game while kidding around?
That's a good question. I don't think everybody's going to be faced with that. We know Carol. We've known Carol for a number of years. And actually, I think everybody here, Zach's played with Carol
yes.
in some games online. And the Dunster clan is an entire family that games together. And they've gamed with, somebody who's just into their double-digit ages all the way up to older children, Carol's own children, and Carol herself. So I can only imagine. I should say dream, because I keep trying to get my family to play D&D and they haven't accepted yet. But I think some of that is just something that happens. We have in our own home group that we play in. We have a friend that we have a couple of people that have a hard time staying focused. Our games have just become, we're going to get together for 4 hours to play in D&D, but we're only going to play for 2 hours, and they're going to be in 20-minute segments because there's food and there's drink and there's talking and those side joke, the things we sort of reel in when we're streaming and presenting sort of a D&D as both the game and entertainment, that just all gets loose, and that's part of that home table environment. But I think those are also teaching moments to talk to family members or whoever's at the table about the importance of sharing the spotlight and giving others a chance. Well, let them say what they're going to say first. And I would keep in my back pocket, if it's really a problem, make it a game mechanic and create a give a miniature or something that is the initiative stick. It's like the conch in Lord of the Flies, because it sounds like you've got a Lord of the Flies situation where if you want to talk, you have to have the initiative stick. You have to have the initiative. There's a lot of creative ways to get around it, but I think you can turn those into teaching moments. Otherwise, as a last resort, if you can't beat them, join them. Embrace the chaos. I don't know what that's going to look like, but give it a shot.
Yeah, I think those are all very good points. And honestly, I don't know that there would be a ton of difference for how I would approach this situation with family members versus other people.
Mhm.
You know, playing with family, I'm sure, is different. Like I've played with my sister and my brother and my mother before. I didn't ever get the chance to play with my dad, which does make me very sad. And then, like I said, my wife plays, and then my son is kind of getting there. He's played some versions of D&D that we've run before, but it's never been something that he's really kind of taken to a lot. But I think in the next couple of years here that he's going to be ready to kind of take the deeper dive. I'm hoping, at least. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, I think basically everything that Jake has just said, like you just have to work with what you've got at a table. If somebody is being disruptive, you have to kind of put your foot down a little bit. Say, hey, chill, cut it out. It's not your turn. You just spent 5 to 10 minutes explaining what you're going to do. Now it's the other person's turn to do so. We have to give equal time. But a lot of that, like you said, is teaching moments. It's showing how you should behave in public and in social situations. And I think there are people that aren't family members that sometimes need that reminder too. And it's okay to put your foot down with them as well and just say, hey, hold on. Like, you had your moment. We'll come back to you in just a second. It's so-and-so's turn. And yeah, it's just, teaching table etiquette and things like that, which hopefully you've had a chance to kind of show your family members in other aspects of their life. But if not, then there's no reason why you can't use, the experience at a gaming table to do so. And in fact, playing games together is something where I think a lot of people in families should spend time. I think gaming with people can teach you a lot about how to conduct yourself in groups of people, how to work with other people and be considerate of other people. And some of those things are qualities that are missing from a lot of grown people in our society, sadly, because there's probably a lot of them that did not grow up playing games together as a family, and it kind of shows. So, yeah, I think games can teach us a lot, like we talked about with therapy and otherwise. And I think that's another aspect where it's a good place to practice and show skills and etiquette and things in a safe space, where you can then take them into your normal everyday life after that. Okay. Zach, did you have anything to add to that? How to deal with family members that get out of line? How do you deal with your dad when he gets out of line?
I asked him to leave the table, frankly. There's no other way to deal with it. No, when I run a game, and I can tell we're not making as much progress as we might want to. Like, I'll every winter break, I run a little mini, very short adventure, at most 3 sessions. It's a continuation of the Shadows over Drift Chapel campaign I ran. And so with that, we've got 3 sessions. We've got to get through some stuff. And I know that we're not going to get through everything I've planned. I know that I have far more ideas than we could ever cover in 3 sessions. And so I do my best to just try and gently keep things moving. Just kind of like, I'll never be rude and cut off because we're just like I've said before, we're just friends trying to have fun, And at the end of the day, if we're having more fun goofing off than we are getting through this adventure, then I don't really care as long as we're hanging out and having fun. But if we really aren't getting anywhere and it's been like a half hour or whatever, I'll be like, all right, guys, so here's the situation again. What do you do? You know? And so I always just try and nudge things along, but I'm very amicable about just having a fun time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like part of that goes back to what we talked about earlier with understanding what the expectations of your players are
Yes.
at the table and then delivering on that expectation.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody really just wants to sit down and tell dick and fart jokes all night long, then okay. Hopefully, you didn't have a super serious, emotionally deep, experience planned, because that would be kind of disappointing and disheartening. And that's a change of your own expectations, which is hard to handle sometimes. But that's why things like session zeros are so useful, because you can get all of that out of the way up front. But yeah, and I think sometimes it's okay to just have a fight kind of in your back pocket. And if things have stagnated, to just pull that out and say, boom, motherfuckers, now you're being attacked. Something has just ripped the roof off of this inn, and now you're in trouble. Roll for initiative.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. So I have one more question that I wanted to ask. And that is, unfortunately, like I mentioned, gaming is not something that I ever had the opportunity to share with my father. And my mom, God bless her, has no real interest in the hobby at all. So what is it about sharing this hobby with one another that is very special to each one of you?
For me, I grew up in a family of storytellers. I've talked about this before on a couple different podcasts, where I think that's where my storytelling originates. Is I grew up listening to my dad and my uncles and my cousins telling stories. Sometimes, the same stories over the years. I would hear the same story told again and again, but it would be refined and it would get better. It wouldn't change. It wouldn't be any less true or exaggerated or whatever the case may be. But the more they told it, the better they got at telling it. And I think I learned the art of storytelling from that. But those stories were coming from my uncle and his two sons, my older cousins, that were firefighters. So they had a lot of that kind of stuff. I had an uncle that was a Navy veteran from the Vietnam era. A lot of it was just them growing up in the 50s and 60s as kids, and how they got away with stuff, what they did when their parents weren't around. I witnessed my parents telling their parents the things they were up to when they were gone for the first time. And so I've taken that art of storytelling, but even before D&D, Zach grew up hearing, I'm a veteran. Zach grew up hearing Army stories. He's heard so many Army stories so many times, he could probably relate those Army stories himself to friends. And, but I've taken that a step further and been able to not only tell Zach, hey, you won't believe what my friends and I just did, but to actually be able to tell those stories together with Zach in a game that I run for him and friends, or inviting him into something like the Dawnbringers to become a part of that, that canon of stories. And because we tell each other about our games, it just makes it that much easier to continue telling stories and be like, oh yeah, I remember this adventure where I told you my friend, their character got absorbed by a slime and they're now part slime. Then I immediately have the context I need for what he's going to say next.
Yeah, I think for me, it's because I remember when I was younger. Obviously, I had mentioned before how Dad kind of got me into games and a lot of the things I like. And games, he played a lot more games when I was a little younger, and he doesn't play a whole lot. now, video games that is. But he got me into D&D, and he's playing more D&D now and more tabletop RPGs. It's a continuation of this shared language and this shared culture, and just having, a lot. The tabletop RPG space is a very diverse space, and it's a very complex sphere and world to be a part of. And both being a part of that, we're both plugged into the same kind of, both the same kind of almost network of things going on, so we can talk about all of the stuff going on. Both, just a new D&D thing got announced. What do you think about this? Oh man, I can't wait for Spelljammer. That kind of thing. It's just having a shared that shared language of D&D, of tabletop RPGs, that I think is really nice to have.
It's a very worthwhile hobby. I mean, I'm slightly biased myself, but it's it's one of those things where the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And having people that are willing to invest the time and the effort and the energy into the hobby, and find it rewarding for themselves to be able to share that with someone else is a really cool kind of bond. And I think the opportunity to share it with someone that is as close as, like, father son, in your instance at the very least, it's amazing to see. It's badass. I love it. That's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to have this exact conversation and to do this episode, because I think generational gaming is something that we are already starting to see a lot more instances of, and that's only going to become more so the case, as the next decades go on with gaming, and I'm here for it. I think that's amazing. So, yeah. So I think that's all of the questions and talking points and things that I can throw at you guys this evening. So thank both of you very, very, very much for agreeing to come on and have this chat with me tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pass things back over to the two of you, so you can once again tell people where they might be able to find you on the internet, give any kind of like closing remarks or whatnot that you might want to. And yeah, then we're going to call it an evening. So whichever of you would like to go.
One last thing I wanted to say before I give my credentials, I guess. Someday, approximately 111 years from now, I will pass on from this earth. And I like that my legacy will be able to continue on in Zach and eventually in younger generations of our family, because we've had the better part of 10 years playing this game. Even if we were to stop suddenly, we won't tomorrow. There's a big chunk of Zach's formative years that were me being able to share these stories and this, just these interests and passions. But I don't plan on passing the empire to you for at least another 111 years, because I plan to live to 160, as Zach well knows. Yeah, I this has been awesome, Jeremy. Of course, I love you dearly, and I'm always happy to share a table with you and happy to join you on stream. You run these amazing podcasts and stuff, so thank you for inviting us. If you want to see me running a game with Jeremy in it where I can seldom remember his character's name, tune in on Thursday nights. That's tomorrow night if you're watching with us live at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/mini-terrain domain for season 6 episode. I think we're on 14 maybe 15 of the Dawnbringers. And Jeremy, you threw out a number like 150 sessions. That's not far off. I would actually say
I
it's
don't think it
probably
is.
closer. I think it's actually probably closer to 160 or 70 with all of the other games that we've played together. Just Dawnbringers alone is roughly 130 plus sessions that we've played together over the years. And also on Monday night, come back for some Scribes and Scrolls, the Candlekeep Mysteries. We will have the whole crew back together. We've added a new player that has joined us at the table. And there's just always good stuff happening at MTD. Sometimes it's just me painting little teeny tiny miniature books and rats and scrolls and stuff. And if that's your jam, come hang out. We'll have a good time.
Are you trying to appeal to the youths?
No, I was kind of
Hey,
sliding
kids.
into a Bruce Willis. Come out to the coast. We'll have a few laughs.
Fists on the carpet. Fist with your toes. That's what it is. There you go.
Yeah, fist with your toes.
Well, I'm Zach, as I mentioned before. I'm still Zach. Hasn't changed. My friend watching is very insistent that I plug my art station. I am a student of 3D art, going to college for that. So I am on ArtStation. If you look up Zach Noorman, I show up on any platform I'm on because I just use my name. And I am on ArtStation / Zach Noorman. I am on Twitter, Zach Noorman. But I don't think you should follow me. I think you should follow my dad, Mini Terrain Domain, and I think you should follow Erasmus Expeditions. Jeremy is a fantastic content creator. I was overjoyed to be able to share the table with him, the virtual table that is guesting on Dawnbringers. He's an incredible role player, creates incredible stuff. Every time I see a new project he's working on, it's always super cool and interesting, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And I was very, very overjoyed to get the message of, hey, do you want to come on Help Action and talk? I was very excited, and thank you so much for having me and my dad on this little talk, this stream. It's cool.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on, both of you. Zach, I've had the pleasure to play with you a couple of times, through the Dawnbringers and such. I have yet to run a game for you, which I'd like to remedy.
Please run a game
absolutely.
for me. Oh, yeah. Please,
dude, message me. Tell me what you want to play. I'll figure out how to make it happen.
I will.
And you can invite your friends if you'd like. So yeah, we'll make it happen. Yeah, I love doing this show. Genuinely, I like talking about RPGs almost as much as I like playing them. Like I said, having a draw to psychology and like the reasons behind why people do things or how people do things. It's always awesome to hear people talk about what they're passionate about. And specifically when it does deal with this hobby of gaming, it's always intriguing and just deeply fascinating to me to have these kinds of conversations with people who come from different walks of life than me, have different experiences from me, and who often have different points of view on things, and just getting the chance to discuss this weird little hobby that all of us enjoy playing and spending an inordinate amount of time on. And yeah, I just couldn't be more pleased with the opportunity to be able to talk to people, like Jake pointed out, from all over the world, and have this kind of shared love of something. So thank you both very, very much for coming on and discussing this with me. Anybody who has tuned in this evening, it's deeply appreciated. Thank you very, very, very much for catching this episode with us, whether you caught it live or whether you may be watching at some point in the future. It means a ton to me. And if you did like this, then do all the stuff, hit the like button, subscribe. If that's your kind of thing, there's 45 earlier episodes of the show, and hopefully there will be 45 additional episodes at some point in the future. Tons of games that I run here on the channel as well, so if you like that kind of stuff, share it around, spread the love. But until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks